36. Cf. J.H. Greenberg on this point. 37. The HE words Hamite and Hamitic have been used to excess in the learned language and everyday speech of the Western world for centuries. This usage originated in a garbled and tendentious reading of the Bible and was responsible for the myth of the curse on the black descendants of H.M. Although the term took on a seemingly less pejorative meaning and at least lost its religious connotations as a result of the researches of 19th-century linguists and ethnologists, it has still continued to be used as a criterion for discriminating between certain black peoples who are regarded as being superior and the rest. In any event, the International Scientific Committee is giving encouragement to the critical studies being conducted into the historical uses of the term, which can only be used with express qualifications. 245. Methodology and African Prehistory. Seligman calls the speakers of Nilo-Hamitic languages racially half-Hamites, while the Bantu are also supposed to be another variety of Hamiticized Negroes. And this, Greenberg continued, on the basis of the speculations of Meinhof for which he never produced the slightest proof, for the very good reason that no proof is possible to the effect that, as Seligman says, Bantu is a mixed language, so to speak, descended of a Hamitic father and a Negro mother. The east/west and north/south migrations of the African peoples have confused the ethnic, racial and linguistic map of the continent. This has been shown in many studies of the evidence of personal names, place names and purely linguistic facts circumflex accent about the basic vocabulary itself. The HE languages of Senegal like Wolof, Diola, Foto and Serer show considerably more similarities to the Bantu languages of South Africa, Tanzania, Cameroon and Zaire than to the languages of Amande family, by which they are geographically surrounded. The HE lexicon, the structure and the essential principles of written ancient Egyptian, as we shall see below, are closer to corresponding phenomena in languages such as Wolof or Hausa, or to the Dahomeyographic tradition, than to the Hamito-Semitic linguistic systems to which they have been incautiously assimilated. Ancient Egyptian, Hausa and the languages of the Rwanda pastoralists, the Abyssinians, the Fulani and the Nubians are baptized Hamito-Semitic on the strength of obviously flimsy data or of an utterly unconvincing methodology and choice of criteria. The Fulani are perhaps of mixed blood just as the Luba, the Susu, the Songhai, and many black peoples in their former or present habitat had contacts with white peoples, although this interbreeding hypothesis is now distinctly questionable as a result of recent discoveries about the process of pigmentation mutation. In its phonology, vocabulary and structure, Fulful bears a closer resemblance to Serer than to any other known language, so much so that the Serer and the Fulani themselves suggest that their relationship is not only linguistic but ethnic. This has not deterred scholars such as Neller, Jeffries, Meinhof, Delafosse and Westermann from seeking to establish a white origin for the Fulani on the grounds that Fulful is a Proto-Hamitic language. 38 W. Taylor goes as far as to write, from its wealth of vocabulary, its sonorous diction and the delicate shade of meaning it can express, I certainly do not think it Fulful belongs to the Black Sudanese family. All these comments show how widespread the confusion is between categories as different as language, way of life and race, not to mention the concept of ethnic group which is used according to taste to refer to one or more of these categories. As Greenberg has pointed out, the simple equation of Hamites with cattle ownership and conquest must be abandoned. In West Africa there is a 100% negative correlation, for the House of Agriculturalists 38. J.H. Greenberg, Opus Fit. 246. History and Linguistics. Who speak a Hamitic language were conquered by cattle-owning Fulani, speaking the Black African Sudanic or Niger-Congo language. Another inversion of the stereotype which one might note is that of the great age and continuity of rule by the Sudanic-speaking Mande or Wolof over peoples so hastily assimilated to Hamitic as the so-called pre-Hamitic Fulani or the Berbers. None of the classifications drawn up for the whole or parts of Africa can so far be considered unquestionably sound from a scientific point of view. Ethnocentricity has gone a long way to distort analysis of the material. In many cases all we are left with is guesswork, the begging of questions and quick overall surveys. The number of conditions must be fulfilled if we are to study African languages according to strictly scientific principles such as will help to clarify the history of the peoples and civilizations of Africa. First, Such word must be free from obsession with irrelevant ideas, derived from the study of Semitic or Indo-European languages, which are part of European history. Furthermore, if we are to establish the relationships between the African languages, we must cite early linguistic evidence, and not geographical distribution, early or late influences, explanatory schema chosen a priori or linguistic features which are marginal in relation to the main facts of the language systems. Auxiliary sciences analyze culturalist, or typological analysis 39 as it is called in English, is part of a science which studies the origin and spread of cultural features, ideas, techniques, and so on. German scholars were first in the practical application of this method, with the study of cultural cycles by Frobenius, Westermann and Baumann, and so on. Such studies have often been concerned with the spread of crops and agricultural techniques, pastoral methods, the invention and spread of iron working and other metalworking techniques, the use of the horse and the development of ontological notions of the pantheon of the gods or of artistic forms. On occasion, however, typology has exceeded its brief. In particular, it has introduced many errors into classificatory linguistics. Extremely incautious writers have felt bound to infer linguistic relationships from cultural features alone when such phenomena are often due to borrowing, contact or convergence. Onomastics is the science of names, place names, toponyms, personal names, anthroponyms, names of water courses, hydronyms, and so on. Onomastics is closely connected with vocabularies. Ethnic communities which have for a time remained relatively homogeneous, as well as Footnote 39. Cf. M. Guthrie, 1969. 247. Methodology and African Prehistory. Linguistic groups which are more heterogeneous in their membership and have a language in common, create their names mainly by reference to the realities of their languages. They provide the territorial or geographical milieu which they inhabit or have inhabited with characteristic names. Equally it is possible, by personal names, to establish the ethnic makeup of a community. In general, the Serer are called John, Junuf, Seen, Tur, Chera, etc., while the Berbers and the Bantu speakers each have their own sets of names. Anthroponymia plays an important part in the history of ethnic groups in political or cultural communities. The study of the names in use among the Tukulor of Senegal, for instance, shows that we are dealing with a very heterogeneous ethno-linguistic community. This Fulfulde-speaking group, established along the river Senegal, and on the borders of Mali and Mauritania, is culturally very homogeneous. They have a highly developed national sentiment. In fact, the community is a combination of Fulani, who supply the language, and of Mande, Serer, Lead Wolof and Berber. Toponymy and hydronymy are also essential for the study of the migration of peoples. Using the names of former or existing villages, precise maps can be drawn up showing the movements of Amande, whose villages have names containing Tugut. In the same way, we can draw up a toponymy map of the former or present habitation of the Fulani who use the term Sahrae for their settlements. A similar map can be drawn for the Wolof using the term Kur, for the Arabo-Berbers using Daru, for the Hausa, and so on. Semantic anthropology or ethno-linguistics is a new approach which attempts to discover man's culture from his language. It is based on an overall analysis of all the data which can be pulled from the language of an ethnic group or heterogeneous linguistic community possessing a common language to express its culture, thought and history. This method goes beyond the mere collection of written and oral traditions and literature. It involves reconstruction of the whole set of ideas in a language, not necessarily in relation to a systematic work or systematic discourse. Such research thus operates at both infra- and supra-linguistic levels to establish from vocabulary, thought patterning, procedures of formalization, of conceptualization and structuring of a language, the various types of knowledge within which the specific worldview and history of the community speaking a given language are crystallized. Ethnolinguistics uncovers systems, metaphysical conceptions, ethics, ontology, aesthetics, logic, religion, knowledge of techniques, and so on. Thus, the written and oral literature relating the past of the Hausa, together with their religious documents, fables, legal, medical, metallurgical and educational practices, shed light both on the development of the content of Hausa thought and on their history and culture. 248. History and linguistics. In predominantly oral civilizations in which written texts are rare, Diachronic interpretation based on the comparison of texts from different periods is virtually impossible. In such cases, linguistics becomes an invaluable means for the rediscovery of the intellectual heritage, almost a sort of time machine. The oral cultures which are traced through semantic anthropology provide us not only with works to be collected and recorded, but also with authors and with the specialties of those authors. The African oral or written culture, such as that of the Wolof, has left its philosopher, like Ndaa Mongo, its political historian, like Saa Basi, its master of speech and eloquence, its master of epic and story, like Ibn Mbeng, for zero and also its inventors of pharmaceutical, medical and agricultural or astronomical techniques. 41. These works and their authors are excellent sources for analyzing the evolutionary dynamism of the culture of a society in all its various forms. Bantu ontology can be deciphered, and even interpreted and systematized, simply by reference to Bantu words relating to the human being in the world, and also on the basis of the process of elaboration and conceptualization which, working through Bantu words and utterances, gives form to the views that the Bantu languages have of such phenomena. Language being as it were the crystallizing point for all the intellectual and material tools fashioned by succeeding generations. We may think of a people's historical experience as being deposited in stratigraphy layers within the very tissue of a language. The adjunct to records and historical thought nowadays, the importance of oral tradition in African history is readily admitted. Traditionalist riots are even asked to scholarly conferences. There have been suggestions that university posts should be created for them and even that historical research and teaching should be entrusted to them. On the whole, the preeminence of spoken over written material is still a fact today, in Africa, as elsewhere in predominantly rural traditional cultures. Orally has its own methods of elaborating and defining the results of thought. While written and oral forms of thought cover the same ground, the means and methods of their conception and transmission are not always the same. For 2we shall simply note that written thought, literature in the narrow sense, 40. All these are historical figures famous in the history of Wolof thought. 41. The works of Johnston on the Yoruba, Temples on the Bandit, All on the Dogon, Tread or on African medicines, Guthrie on metallurgy, etc., with the fixed literary class 6, make up an important contribution to semantic anthropology. Cf. P. Diane 1972. 42. Cf. P. Diane 1972. 249. Methodology and African prehistory has a greater tendency to become fixed for all time, as it is set down. This distinguishes it from oral tradition, which offers greater latitude for invention and myth creation. On the level of language, the spoken word has also greater potential for dialectalization because there is less control over its development. A language used mainly for oral expression remains closer to the people and more exposed to the distortions which regular use brings about in its structure, in its sounds and even in the forms which it borrows. The literary language, on the other hand, tends more toward unification. In addition, it has a more important visual side to it, because it has, among its means of expression, graphical features which give it a particular character, an orthography which conflicts with its phonology, a system of punctuation, etc. Oral language, on the other hand, makes greater use of sound as a means of signifying thought through cadence, rhythm, assonance or dissonance and other vocal tricks. The importance of a role played by memory, to compensate for the absence of the written medium, also affects the character of the spoken word and the forms it uses. It consciously submits to the restraints of mnemonic techniques, a specific science for the memorizing of texts. Written records and oral tradition thus become complementary, and unite their respective virtues. 43. Moreover, oral accounts, once they are transcribed, become literary texts. 44. The graphical tradition, African writing nature and origin of the needs which are met by the invention of writing differ according to context and have not always been clearly brought out. Writing as an instrument of commerce and administration is a phenomenon of urban civilization, but this is not necessarily the origin of all writing. In Africa, not only in the age of the pharaohs but also under the kings of Dahomey or the Manding romances, writing served mainly non-material needs. Egyptian writing and that of the Dahomey bas-reliefs or the Bambara or Dogon ideograms had, in their original context, Two purposes. The HE first was to materialize thought and to enshrine something of religious or sacred significance. According to legend, Egyptian writing was invented by the god Thoth, and long remained confined principally to temples and the use of priests. It served to record secrets designed for the use of initiates or as a medium for a type of thought conceived as an active substance to be materialized in the word or writing itself. 43. Cf. P. Diane, 1972. 44. Cf. The many publications on this theme, they have 8 bought, they I brought him south, Muthuda, Edampira, Kate, Modi N, F. Lacrawal, M. Kryal, G. Diaterman, Whiteley, B. Norris, L. Castellut, T. Nyanet, M. Diabate, H.A.M. Beatite have written classic works on this subject, published by the Oxford University Press, Juilliard, Gallimard, Centre de Niame etc. 250. History and linguistics. The HE second great function assigned to literary records in civilizations of purely African origin coincides with the need to perpetuate history. Both Egyptian writing and that of the palaces of Abomey are used to glorify sovereigns and peoples who are concerned that their feats should be remembered. The HE same purpose preoccupied the Bambara or Dogon as they carved their ideographs on the walls of Bandiagara. There are more than affinities between the recade of King Glaili, which was a message-carrying ceremonial axe, and the palette of Nartmur. Not only is the spirit the same, but also the principles and techniques of writing. 45 Egyptian writing, as we have said, is attributed to the god Thoth. Who also invented magic and science, as did the jackal-headed god of the Dogon, who is himself the guardian of the word, knowledge and effective speech. The few experts who have studied, often most minutely, the systems of writing originating from Africa have all without exception ignored the seemingly obvious and technically demonstrable link between the best-known Egyptian hieroglyphs and the writing systems of Black Africa. The Egyptian hieroglyph remained fundamentally pictographic in its original function as an instrument of the temples. Like its Dahomey counterpart, it makes as strong as possible the reference to the image. It is a deliberately realistic writing concerned to materialize living beings, objects and ideas in the most concrete and substantial manner, rather as if to store or conserve their natural qualities. It is not by chance that the distortion of pictographic writing by the use of a cursive script, which alters and disfigures the objects represented, is allowed only outside the temples. Hieratic writing, which was used principally for secular purposes despite the implications of its Greek etymology, and popular demotic writing, with its even more simplified signs, are non-sacred, utilitarian systems. The Egyptian priest, the hieroglyph has, in addition to its other qualities, as N. Cohen so rightly emphasizes, the power of magical evocation, and this explains, in his opinion, why images of maleficent creatures are either omitted or mutilated. Here we have an ontological viewpoint which is deeply rooted and steeped in the Negro African tradition. For thousands of years, this tradition remained incapable of secularizing thought and its oral or graphic media, as the Indo-Europeans and especially the Greeks had done. The Bambara, the Yoruba, the Ensevadai and the Dogon priests have exactly the same view of the writing systems which they use in their temples for their divination ceremonies. The unity of the writing systems originating from Africa lies not only in the ideological presuppositions which give those systems their functions and nature, but in the technique of transcription itself. Continually throughout the history of African writing systems, 3 techniques for the graphic recording of thought are relevant: the use of the image, through pictograms depicting the creature or the object, the use of 45. M. Glaili, 1974. 251. Methodology and African prehistory. The symbol to represent an entity through ideograms, which are signs with no direct link of physical resemblance to the concept they symbolize, and finally the use of phonograms, each representing one whole set of homophones, that is, of entities denoted by the same sound or group of sounds. This is the principle of pictophonographic writing. It is revealing to compare the palette of Narmer and the recades of Glaili or Dakabonu. Both transcribe thought on the same principles. In the palette, we have the image of a king seizing a defeated enemy by the hair in order to dispatch him, while the rest of the conquered army flees beneath the feet of the gigantic pharaoh. The pictograms are clear and eloquent. The other signs are ideograms. One such distinct sign is oval taut, symbolizing the earth. Above is a group of signs and a square as the emblem of the pharaoh's name, Horus. The fish and a bird make up the name of the pharaoh. The two images are pictophotograms. The recade of Jezreel shows the Dahomey sovereign in the form of a buffalo, as Pharaoh is symbolized by a falcon. His teeth are bared, meaning that he sowed panic among his enemies from earliest youth. In this case, we have an example of a symbolic representation. Others are more significant. The recade of King Dakadonu or Dakodonu, which is older 1625 to 50 and is described by Lee Harris, shows even more clearly the principle of the Dahomey hieroglyph. The text on the axe blade can be read as follows. There is a pictographic symbol representing a silex dA, with below the symbol of the earth, KO, having a hole in the middle, Donon. These signs are pictograms used here as pictophotograms. By combining them, as in the case of the pharaoh's name in the Narmer palette, we get the name of the Dahomey king Dakodonu. Dahomey writing bears the strongest possible likeness to the Egyptian hieroglyphs and the principles and spirit of that system. It reveals the three techniques used by Egyptian graphics: the pictographic image, the ideographic symbol and the pictophonographic sign. 46 The Soviet scholar Dmitry A. Oldrog, in an article outstanding for the synthesis it presents, has reasserted that, as Keith and Diop first pointed out, the hieroglyphic system survived until recently in Black Africa. In his historical description of the three kingdoms of Congo, Matambe and Angola, published in 1687, Cavazzi di Montecucolo asserts that hieroglyphic writing was used in these areas. In 1896, a hieroglyphic inscription was discovered on the rock Sata in Mozambique, beside the Zambezi. The HE text of the inscription was published at the time. Keith and Diop notes elsewhere the use of a late pictographic writing system in Bodel, where recently traces of hieroglyphs have been discovered on 1,000-year-old baobabs. The Va of Liberia for many years used a pictographic writing system on strips of bark. Meroitic writing, which grew up on the southern limits of ancient Egypt, is unquestionably a continuation of ancient Egyptian writing. The latter 46. See Chapter 4 above. 252. History and linguistics inspired the former, or else the former gave rise to the latter, or shares a common origin with it. The ideographic systems of writing, however, seem to have been more durable on western Black African soil than were the hieroglyphs. In practice, the vast majority of African peoples are familiar with the use of ideograms either in divining techniques or in their use by priests of religion and engravers of works of art, and so on. The GURM have a very elaborate system of divination. The diviner, the Tambipuelo, draws signs in the sand and interprets them. Then he issues the kind of prescription consisting of abstract signs carved with a knife on a piece of calabash to denote the altars, the places where the client must go to make sacrifices, what kind of animal must be sacrificed, HOW many times, and so on. It is in fact a system of coded writing. The IF divination system, which is found all along the coast of the Gulf of Benin, is also remarkably rich. The HE diviner shuffles palm nuts from one hand to the other 8 times, and according to the number of nuts remaining in his left hand he writes the figure on a tray sprinkled with dust or on the ground. Tables to a possible maximum of 256 are thereby drawn up, of which the 16 most important constitute the Odu threads or words of the gods ruled by Ifa, the god of destiny. Everyone must sacrifice to his Odu but at the same time take account of those of his relatives and ancestors, his country, and so on. The HE permutations are legion, and the multiplicity of Odu are combined in a sort of mythological strategy which is also a graphological technique. The collection of ideographic systems 47 has given a rich yield, especially in Savannah countries which have retained their traditional religion and are relatively little affected by Islam. This is no coincidence. Experts, of which my Geode was one of the first, have uncovered some of these systems. Dogon ideographic writing has been described by M. Kryol and G. Dieterlen, who analyzed the Bombarographic system and made a good survey of the area's systems. Sensibility ideography, which is used by the Igbo of southern Nigeria, was discovered by Europeans at the end of the last century. It is based on transcribing principles that were very widespread throughout the Guinea coastlands. Phonetic writing, 48, which systematizes the use of phonograms, represents simple or complex sounds by regular signs. Such systems, in the opinion of the author, appear in Africa as a late development. The hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt and of Dahomey represent many sounds with signs, but purely phonetic systems based on the word, the syllable or the single. 47. Cf. G. Nyangora Recherches sur l'appoint elder, doctoral thesis, Babbage, 1972. 48. D. Dalby put forward interesting new ideas on this topic in Dalby, 1970. 253. Methodology and African Prehistory. Phoneme, the latter being alphabetic transcription, mark the new stage. 49. Berber writing, which is used among the Tuareg of the Sahara and which is still known by the name of Tafinaku, is said to have developed under Punic influence through contact with Carthage. The Nubian writing system was formed in the 10th century through contact with Coptic writing, which in turn grew up under Greek influence. The alphabet used for Amharic and Tigrinya in Ethiopia is derived from the Sabaean writing of southern Arabia. The West African syllabic and alphabetic writing systems that were very widespread on the Guinea coast and in Sudanese areas from the end of the 18th century may have arisen by internal developments, or may have taken on their final form under the distant or not so distant influence of an outside element of European or Arab origin. 50. By writing became known in Europe in 1834 through the discoveries of Eric Bates, and in 1849 through those of Cole. It developed in an area where traces of the hieroglyphic system had been noted. Mosequent, the 19th century Liberian consul in England, described the principles of the hieroglyphic system used in his area at that time. 51. Mamolu reports that, to express victory over an enemy, the Vai drew on a strip of bark instead of papyrus the outline of a man running with his hands on his head. The dot is placed alongside the image to indicate large numbers of fleeing men, the routed army. In this use of a dot to denote the plural instead of the dashes used in the Nile Valley in Iniquity we find features of Pharaonic script. Thus the Vai have altered their earlier system in the direction of phonetic transcription. Today, we have instances similar to that of Vai writing among many West African peoples, the Malinke, Mande, Bassa, Gert, Kapela, Toleme, etc. Wolof and Seer have also recently been provided with graphical systems based on these principles. Contrary to the commonly held view, the use of writing has been a permanent feature of African history and thought, from the palette of Narber to the Recade of Glalie. The wealth of writing systems and of evidence of their use bears witness to this fact. Post-Pharaonic African writing systems followed a normal development, and there are many reasons for this. Quite simply, this development was adapted to the historical context and the historical requirements of an affluent rural society and economy. Its members were not forced by the pressures of poverty to consolidate in their OWNH their material or intellectual acquisitions, because these were not continually threatened. The N. 49. E. Ha. 1959. 50. Sudanese writing systems combine pictograms realistic images with ideograms signs with symbolic meanings. Cf. M. Kryol and G. Dieterlen, 1951. The combination of these signs serves to transcribe and fix speech in a manner decipherable for the initiate, from the writing and the knowledge which the writing conveys. 51. Cf. D. Holdereg's Excellent Survey Article, 1966. 254. History and Linguistics. Ecology. Providing an easy balance between resources and population gave most African civilizations and their cultural features the power to wax and wane geographically while always preserving their essence, their principles. From the point of view of internal equilibrium, there was no great risk. But external forces and the growing effects of progress made such fragility a handicap. Conclusion. Linguistics is absolutely essential to the development of an African science of history. However, it will be able to make its contribution only if a great effort is undertaken. So far its contribution has been relatively slight and, in many instances, scientifically unsound. Research is underway. The precision of its methods has increased, and the area of its investigations has broadened considerably. In this context, we can expect the analysis of African languages to contribute in the near future to the clarification of important points of the history of the continent. 255. Plate tile. By the Serpent King Steel Musée du Louvre, Plate 10.2 The recade dedicated to King Dokbonu, first sovereign of Dangsome Nubia. Plate 10.3 Awe-inspiring lion cub from Abomi Museum Foto the Maghlali, Nubia. 256. Symbol of power, from Abomi Museum Nubia KLHEE 10.5 First page of the first chapter Oj Koron in Vi from T. Sobenga, 1973, Presence Africaine. Plate 10.6 Phonetic chart of characters from T. Sobenga, 1973, Presence Africaine. WT/E. WLWO. WFLVU. YYJFLYO. ZA. ZEZU ZLO. ZOCA. 1 \meter F. W equals and SVKTR KH. BD5. PDI. TR. S1. CH. A0 1.4I, plus he. Kite. Plus Cho by 0 BCH6J1 SIGBBF -5. Elijah Weidel, vertical line CI.I, yes, G.JFLLO, IMUM 8 circumflex accent. E greater than 5 RRFGW 11 grams GBLG. Giabo. 4. Giba JH. GC. L circumflex accent Ni KHN 8 Hua. GB. KPFV KP KPI KP. KF KP KPB. LL greater than DI form. LL double will IU. ID. IDLELELED IDS IDM BAMET what MBEMBELMBO2 BO NIGV. NFR. Plus greater than TI S. TE copyright TDKL. July. SIJHH a Foto I. T. T4. Minimum bill NEEDH. T. These vowels have allies out and soft A as up. E asterisk as in A, as in net. IWE print this chart has received, but WE suspect that the sound as in pin, as in old, V as in not, V as in tube. Denoted BYU is really the U in rule, not that usually heard in tube which is a combination of Y and Z. Plate 10.4 The recade showing a gourd. 257. K haiku KOY 849.962/YH circumflex accent H60 to the SE. Mackenzie 7 pounds 57 asterisk white 73 C9. Loma FV /O. Kapika, H asterisk, J-O circumflex accent IC/circumflex accent 044 circumflex accent pounds. / asterisk tilde all the 5, the circumflex accent KO bottom. C906 asterisk T equals NTO greater than pounds to 8 number sign 9 to 6 Y to dollars VE/V. Hubry decom kilovolt and euro safe 3 ASA 3 accent. D jet the YC11 V. Back. Mondang JJJ8LQ. HY plus minus J greater than LD 0 plus minus J pounds plus minus J. Lola //4 II /ZI /circumflex accent greater than pounds Z. Pounds Fula 8 %_37 circumflex accent YTVL for /77x7 asterisk R7 circumflex accent R7M. Fula Ba L circumflex accent I1 circumflex accent Fu L circumflex accent I circumflex accent 0. The Begam and Garo scripts no record available. The Yoruba Holy Script and the Gola script both undeciphered are excluded from this chart. Plate 10.7 Sample characters from the indigenous scripts from D. Tel B, 1970, 110-11, Frank Gass and C.O. Limited. 258. A pictographic system. MUM word meaning. Signs collected, in Lucy IA pot. P asterisk. Font. Mad. Naiad. Gola nut F /J. Only 1 IGJ to T. House asterisk / circumflex accent I. Wifey and. Signs collected in IO07 Gulciaring. Copyrighted GS $. Bibliographic system. F%. $. Pounds equals Piman or Poran, people. Equals Keju or Huami, country. Equals and diet, today. Equals Inya asterisk, the earth. U, food. S/WUS, equals N, and G equals GO slash, to do. FA, to give. Circumflex accent asterisk equals P1 or aim, to admire. See phonetic syllabic system. Tilde 9, syllable A, from a meaning, to. JF, Ben, from bent, dance a kind of. Joe equals B, from KIII, to circumcise, or by, to hold. Circumflex accent equals chop, from CAU, fish. Plate 10.8 The Homographic System from T. Golombeck, 1973, Presence Africaine. Plate 10.9 The Egyptian and West African Graphic Systems from T. Golombeck, 1973, Presence Africaine. I. Egyptian pictograms about 4000 before our era. Man running, an arm outstretched in equals messenger. Mammal's stomach, dot slash, equals 3 stomach, body FJ circumflex accent C equals greater than. I circumflex accent pounds by 2. 3 equals numerous, rich. IJ circumflex accent slash Y circumflex accent X circumflex accent, woman or snake A slash W worm DDB. If backslash W circumflex accent N, OX. JF circumflex accent circumflex accent lunar crescent, 1K equals moon. Sensibadi pictograms 1 asterisk. Hender L, the man running an arm circumflex accent outstretched. Backslash the macram CG or page 212 The messenger. Circumflex accent Jill J Dare L loot, symbol containing fish. Circumflex accent bones. Tall the, Lieutenant Lizard. Then M1 McGregor page 212 Snake, Darelid 4, very long snake, Uruk, IKOT, snake Nethel and Skaven Uyanga. J asterisk Talbot JJ, see sun shining, Nam, Uten sun in Efik and in Tiviata Nanji, in Uyanga. Underscore circumflex accent Talbot JD, lunar crescent, BBD equals moon, in Uyanga. 34. For the Ansidai signs, cf. Especially, J.K. McGregor, Opus Fit, page 215, page 217, page 219, the signs are numbered from 1 to 98. Edel, Opus Fit, Pipe, LXVLXVII, in total 363 signs, P.A. Talbot, Opus Fit, Appendix G: Sensibadi signs, pages 448-461 177 signs and A texts. 259. Plate Tile. Tile the Palette of Narber from C.A. Diop, 1955, Presence Africaine. 260. Editorial Note, Theories on the Races and History of Africa. J. KCRBO. The HE concept of race is one of the most difficult to define in scientific terms. If we agree with most scholars since Darwin that mankind is a single stock, the theory of races can only be developed scientifically within the context of evolution. Ratiation is part of the overall process of evolutionary differentiation. As J. Ruffy has pointed out, it requires 2 conditions. First, breeding isolation often partial which gradually produces a special genetic and morphological situation. Ratiation thus arises from a difference of gene stock, caused either by genetic drift, that is, the random transmission of genes allows a given gene to be transmitted more often than another, unless of course the allele is more widespread, or by natural selection. The HE latter leads to adaptive differentiation, by which a group tends to preserve the genetic equipment that best adapts it to a given environment. In Africa both processes have clearly gone on. Genetic drift, which works most powerfully within small groups, will have operated within limited populations, which are in any case liable to undergo a social process of binary fission at times of territorial and succession disputes, and also because of the great expanses of virgin land available to them. The HE genetic inheritance of endogamous and forest-dwelling peoples will have been particularly affected by this process, while natural selection will have operated in environments as diverse as desert, dense forest, high plateaus and mangrove coasts. What it amounts to in biological terms is that the members of one race share certain genetic factors which in another racial group are replaced by their alleles, whilst in half-breeds both gene types exist together. As was to be expected, races were originally identified according to visible criteria, but deeper realities gradually came to be taken into account. Indeed, Outward features and inward phenomena are not completely unrelated, for although the color of the skin is determined by hereditary mechanisms which depend on certain genes, it is also affected by the environment. A positive correlation has been noted between stature and the highest temperature of the hottest month, and a negative correlation. For polycentric theories with their variants, see the works of G. Weidenreich and Kuhn and the disproofs of Roberts. Methodology and African prehistory. Between height and humidity. Similarly, a narrow nose warms the air better in a colder climate and humidifies dry air. This is why the nasal index of peoples south of the Sahara shows a marked tendency to rise as one passes from the desert through the savanna to the forest. Although they have the same number of sweat glands as whites, they perspire more and this keeps their body and skin at a lower temperature. There are therefore several stages in the scientific investigation of races. The morphological approach Reichstad defines races as natural zoological groupings of forms belonging to the hominid family whose members display the same typical set of standard and hereditary characteristics from the morphological and behavioral points of view. The whole arsenal of observations and measurements now exists, ranging from data concerning skin color and hair form or quantity of body hair to those concerning metrical and non-metrical features, or even including the anterior femoral flexure and the cusps and grooves of molars. Special attention has been given to the cephalic index because it relates to the part of the head which houses the brain. Dixon, for example, establishes various types on the basis of 3 indices combined in various ways, namely, the horizontal cephalic index, the vertical cephalic index and the nasal index. But out of the 27 possible combinations only 8 those occurring most often have been accepted as representative of fundamental types, the other 18 being considered to be mixtures. Morphological characteristics, however, are merely a more or less distorted version of the genetic stock. They are seldom all found combined in a perfect prototype. It is a matter, rather, of particularly striking features of the interaction between MBN and his environment, which is to say that they are much more acquired than innate. This illustrates one of the most serious weaknesses of the morphological and the typological approach, in which the exceptions are eventually found to be more important and more numerous than the rule. In addition, we should not overlook the academic disputes over the methods of measurement, how, when, and so on, which make it impossible to draw valid comparisons. Multivariate distance data and coefficients of racial resemblance, format and shape data, the generalized distance of Natal nobis, all these lend themselves to processing, but a race is a real biological entity which has to be examined as a living whole and not as a dissected specimen. The demographic or population approach accordingly. This method concentrates from the outset on group factors, gene pool or genome, which are less prone to variation than the genetic structure of individuals in varying circumstances. Indeed, it is the frequency of characteristics observed in a race, rather than the characteristics. 262. Theories on the races and history of Africa themselves which are significant for the identification of a race. NOW that the morphological method has been practically abandoned, to see serological or genetic factors can be classified according to more objective rules. According to Landman, a race is a group of human beings WHO except in a few cases display more genotypical similarities, and also very often more phenotypic similarities, to one another than to members of other groups. The Lex also follows a demographic approach to the question of race using purely geographical names: North Europeans, Southern Africans, and so on. Schwidetsky and Boyd have emphasized genetic systematics, distribution of blood groups A, B and O, combinations of the rhesus factor, the gene of the saliva secretion, and so on. Blood group specialists also take anatomy into account, but at the molecular level. They are concerned with describing the minute structure of those human cells whose antigen structure and enzyme systems are differentiated, the most convenient tissue for this purpose being the blood. Blood markers have made possible a historic qualitative advance in the scientific identification of human groups. They have decisive advantages over morphological criteria, starting with the fact that they are almost always monometric, that is, their presence depends on the single gene, whereas the cephalic index, for instance, is the product of a number of factors that are not easy to pinpoint. 3. Again, while morphological criteria are translated into figures which lead up to arbitrary and ill-defined distinctions, as for instance between the typical brachycephal and the typical dolichocephal, with blood markers it is a case of one thing or the other. the person is either group E or not, Rh positive or Rh negative, and so on. Furthermore, blood factors are almost completely unaffected by environmental influences, the hemotype being permanently fixed at the time of the formation of the zygote. Hence blood markers are free from the subjectivism of morphological typing. Individuals are described in terms of genotypes, and populations in terms of genotype frequencies. The high degree of precision of these factors makes up for the fact that they represent only a small part of the mass of genes that go to make up the genome. This has made possible the compilation of an atlas of the traditional races. 3 categories of blood factors have been established. SOME, such as the blood groups in the ABO system, occur in all the traditional races without exception, and have sent out antedate hominization. Others, such as the variants in the Rh system, are omnipresent but preponderate in certain races, thus the R chromosome is mainly found in whites, while the Ro chromosome, the so-called African chromosome, has a particularly high frequency of occurrence in blacks south of the Sahara. These are therefore certainly systems dating from the time when MN began to move into a variety of ecological niches. Another category of variants indicates 2. Cf. K. Wiercinski, 1965. 3. Cf. J. Ruffy, 1977a. 263. Methodology and African prehistory. Even clearer racial demarcation lines, as for instance the Sutter and Henshaw factors, found almost only in blacks, and the Kell antigen, found mainly in whites. Though never completely exclusive, they have been termed racial markers. Lastly, some factors are very localized geographically, as for instance hemoglobin C among the peoples of the Balta Plateau. Though blood factors have no direct value as adaptations, they are not unrelated to the infective and parasitic aspects of the environment. The latter may operate selectively on blood factors with survival value, thus leading, for instance, to the presence of characteristic hemoglobins. The N example is the S hemoglobins, associated with the presence of sickle cells or drepanocytes among the red corpuscles, which have been detected in the blood of blacks in Africa and Asia. Hemoglobin SHBS, which is dangerous only in the case of homozygotes, represents an adaptation to the presence of Plasmodium falciparum, the malaria parasite. The study of blood groups over wide areas makes it possible to construct isogenear curves showing the geographical distribution of blood factors throughout the world. Together with the computation of genetic chronology, it gives us some idea of the interrelationships between different populations, and the direction of the gene flows makes it possible to reconstruct the earlier stages in their evolution. But the blood group and population method, despite its remarkable achievements, comes up against difficulties. For one thing, its parameters are multiplying at a tremendous rate, and are already producing results which are odd to the point of being regarded by some as aberrant. Thus L. Corvallis Fortes's phylogenetic tree of the peoples of the world departs from the anthropometric classification. The latter puts African pygmies and San on the same anthropometric branch as the Aborigines of Australia and New Guinea, whereas on the phylogenetic tree pygmies and San are closer to the French and English, and Australian Aborigines are closer to the Japanese and Chinese. For in other words, anthropometric characteristics are more affected by the climate than genes are, so that morphological affinities are more a matter of similar environments than of similar heredities. The work of R.C. Lewontin, based on blood group research, shows that for the world as a whole over 85% of variations occur within nations. There is only a 7% variation between nations belonging to the same traditional race, and only 7% between the traditional races. In short, there is more difference between individuals in the same racial group than there is between races. This is why more and more scientists are adopting the radical position of 4. Quoted by J. Ruffy, 1977a, page 385. Again, on the basis of certain genetic characters the fire antigen in the Duffy system, the Ardo allele, etc. the percentage of white admixture in American blacks resulting from the crossbreeding that goes on in the United States is put at 25 to 30%. Some scientists have concluded from this that what we have here is a new racial group, somewhat hastily labeled North American colored. 264. Theories on the races and history of Africa. Denying the existence of race altogether. According to J. Ruffy, In the early days of mankind, small groups of individuals, living in very different, widely separated ecological areas, became differentiated in response to very powerful selective pressures, their technical resources being extremely limited, and gave rise to the variants Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis and the earliest Homo sapiens. The facies, for instance, which is a part of the body most exposed to specific environments, evolved differentially, black pigmentation in the skin developed in tropical regions, and so on. But this differentiating tendency was soon halted, and remained embryonic. Man everywhere began to adapt himself to his environment not morphologically but culturally, that is, in clothing, habitat, food, and so on. Man born in the tropics, the hot climate, evolved for a long time as Australopithecus, and Homo habilis and even Homo erectus. It was only during the Second Ice Age, thanks to his efficient control of fire, that Homo erectus opted to live in cold climates. The human species is moving from polytypic to monotypic, and this process of racial standardization seems to be irreversible. The whole of mankind must be regarded nowadays as a single pool of intercommunicating genes. 5 In 1952, Livingstone published his famous article on the non-existence of human races. In view of the enormous complexity and therefore the inconsistency of the criteria adopted for the description of races, he recommended that the Linnean classification system should be abandoned and suggested a genealogical tree instead. In areas which are not isolated, the frequency of certain traits or genes changes gradually in various directions, and the differences between two populations are proportional to the physical distance between them, following the kind of geographical gradient decline. By relating each distinctive trait to the selection and adaptation factors that may have contributed to its development, we find frequency rates apparently linked far more closely to technological, cultural and other factors which do not at all coincide with the distribution map of races. 6. Whenever a different criterion is adopted, color of the skin, cephalic index, nasal index, genetic characteristics, and so on, a different MP is obtained. That is why some scientists have come to the conclusion that the whole theory of races is unconvincing and can be regarded as mythical. In the light of the most recent advances in human genetics, no biologist nowadays any longer admits the existence of races within the human species. 7 Biologically speaking, skin color is a negligible element in relation to the genome as a whole. Bentley Glass considers that the white race differs from the black by no more than 6 pairs of genes. In terms of numbers of genes, there are often greater variations than this among whites, and among blacks likewise. And the strength of this, UNESCO, having held a 5 E. Mer. Quoted by J. Ruffy, 1977 A. Page 115. 6. Cf. M. F. 8. Montague, 1952. 7. J. Ruffy, 1977 A. Page 116. 265. Methodology and African Prehistory. Conference of International Experts, issued a declaration to the effect that race is not so much a biological phenomenon as a social myth. 8. The truth of this is demonstrated by the fact that in South Africa a Japanese is regarded as an honorary white and a Chinese as colored. Hiernas compares mankind to a network of genetic territories, of collective genomes forming peoples that resemble each other in varying degrees, the qualitative distance of which is expressed by a quantitative estimate numerical taxonomy. The boundaries of such territories, as defined on the basis of climatic gradient, fluctuate, in fact, with all the changes which affect the visible features phenotypes and the serological data genotypes of communities. This bears out Darwin's brilliant intuition that any race seems, in the last analysis, to be identified with an endless process similar to those observed in fluid dynamics, and all peoples have been and are becoming hybridized. In fact, whenever one people come together with another, the result can be analyzed in scientific terms as a gene migration, and a gene flow affects the biological capital of both. But even if this was a more scientific approach, even if these shifting genetic territories were really accepted by the communities concerned, could we say that racial feelings would thereby be eradicated? For their visible and tangible differences would still be in evidence in the form of phenotypical features. Ever since the assertion by Nazis, and by other pseudo-intellectuals as well as Hitler, that Mediterranean MEN represents an intermediate level between the Aryan, Prometheus of mankind, and the black, half-ape by descent. The racial myth dies hard. Impenitent morphologists still feebly foster the wretched idea. 9. Linnaeus, writing in the 18th century, subdivided the human species into 6 races: American, European, African, Asiatic, savage and monstrous. We may be sure that racialists fall into one or other of the last 2 categories. From all these theories, theses and hypotheses, let us therefore single out for closer scrutiny the dynamic character of racial phenomena, bearing in mind that we are dealing with slow and complex processes of change occurring at many different levels, among which variations in the color of the skin, even if measured by an electrospectrophotometer, and the shape of the nose rank so low as to be almost negligible. Interacting factors in racial dynamics deserve special attention, namely, the genetic heritage, which can be regarded as a gigantic biological data bank in action, and the 8. For declarations on the racial question, UNESCO, Paris, 1969. 9. J. Ruffy quotes a French dictionary of medicine and biology which in 1972 still upheld the concept of race, stating that there are 3 main groups, white, black and yellow, on the basis of morphological, anatomical, sociological and also psychological criteria. At the turn of the century, Charles C. Yobos wrote in Histoire de la Civilisation, the MEN people on the earth also differ in language, intelligence and feelings. These differences make it possible to subdivide the earth's inhabitants into a number of groups known as races. 266. Theories on the races and history of Africa. Environment in the broadest sense of the term, since in this context it starts with the fetal environment. The changes resulting from the interaction of these 2 basic factors may occur either in the form of selection and gene migration crossbreeding, which is difficult to verify, or in the form of genetic drift or gene mutation, which is a matter of chance. In short, it is the entire history of a population that accounts for the different aspects of its present racial facies, including group attitudes, religion and dietary, clothing and other customs. In this context, what can we say about race where the African continent is concerned? The historical analysis of the subject is difficult, since human fossils are not well preserved owing to the humidity and the acidity of African soils. It can be said, however, that contrary to the European theories which sought to explain the peopling of Africa by migrations from Asia, the population of Africa is for the most part indigenous. Several writers think that the color of the skin of the earliest inhabitants of the continent living in tropical latitudes must have been dark brace, 1964, since the color black is a natural protection against harmful rays, and against ultraviolet rays in particular. The pale skin and light-colored eyes of the peoples of the North are held to be secondary characteristics caused by mutation or selective pressure cold, 1965. Today, although WE cannot draw hard and fast boundaries, WE can identify 2 major racial groups on the African continent living on either side of the Sahara. In the north there is the Arab Berber group, which derives its genetic heritage from the Mediterranean peoples Libyans, Semites, Phoenicians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Turks, etc. And in the south there is the Negro group. The point to know is that climatic changes which have sometimes obliterated the desert have resulted in much mixing population groups over thousands of years. Niima Satoshi and A. R. Roy Kudhuri carried out a study 11 of the genetic differences within and between the Caucasoid and Mongoloid groups, using several dozen blood markers. They used correlation coefficients to establish the approximate dates when these peoples diverged and came into being as distinct groups. The Negroid grouping seems to have become distinct 120,000 years ago, whilst the Mongoloids and Caucasoids only separated 55,000 years ago. According to J. Ruffy, this chronology fits in with the greater part of our basic group data. 12. From that period onward, much interbreeding took place on the African continent. Attempts have even been made to bring out the biological distances between populations by statistical analysis of their main components. Jacquard set out to do this, using 5 blood group systems comprising